I've been driving trucks for nearly 15 years, and by now I've seen a lot out there on the road. I work for a freight company based in Missouri, doing long-haul routes across the country. Tonight, I was on a run from Kansas City to a small town in Arkansas, delivering supplies to a warehouse. I'd started around 5 in the evening, and by now it was well past midnight. The plan was to finish the trip by early morning, but I still had a few hours left to go. It was one of those nights where the road felt empty. I was driving down a back road that twisted through miles of dense woods, with nothing around but trees on both sides. The darkness seemed thick, like it was closing in around me, and the only thing cutting through it was my headlights. I've driven roads like this before, 100 times, and usually I enjoy the quiet. But tonight, something just felt off. I couldn't quite put my finger on it. It was just one of those strange feelings that comes out of nowhere. About halfway through this stretch, I started hearing a weird clanking sound coming from the engine. It wasn't loud, but it was unusual. Something I hadn't heard before. I figured I'd better check it out before it got any worse. So, I pulled over to the side of the road, left the truck running, and grabbed my flashlight. Stepping out into the cold night air, the quiet hit me like a wall. I popped the hood and shined my light into the engine, trying to see if anything was out of place. At first glance, everything looked fine, but I kept looking around, still feeling that nagging sense that something wasn't right. While I was focused on the engine, I heard a rustling sound coming from the woods nearby. It sounded like something moving through the brush. I glanced over, thinking it might just be a deer or some animal, but I didn't see anything in the dark. I shrugged it off and went back to checking the truck, figuring it was just a critter out looking for food. Then, just a few moments later, I heard something that made me freeze in place. A scream. It was faint at first, distant, but there was no mistaking it. It was definitely a scream. I stood still, listening, trying to figure out if I'd really heard it. The night was so quiet, it almost didn't seem real. But then, a few seconds later, I heard it again. This time, it was a little louder, a little closer, and this time, there was no doubt about it. It sounded like a person, someone in real trouble. My stomach twisted into a knot. Out here, miles from anything, hearing a scream like that was unsettling to say the least. I glanced toward the woods and shined my flashlight in that direction, but I couldn't see anything. The trees were thick, and the light from my flashlight didn't reach far enough to make anything out. I tried telling myself it was probably nothing, maybe just my mind playing tricks on me. But that scream, something about it stuck with me. A few more seconds passed, and then I heard it again. This time, it was weaker, more like a cry or a whimper. That was it. A chill ran through me. I was standing there, frozen, staring into the woods, when I noticed something dark on the ground at the edge of the trees. I took a few cautious steps closer, shining my flashlight down, and that's when I saw it. Blood. Dark, fresh blood, still gleaming in the light. There were marks leading away from it, like something or someone had been dragged. My heart started pounding in my chest. I didn't know what to make of it, but every part of me was telling me that something bad had happened here. I stood there, unsure of what to do next. I didn't want to go deeper into the woods, but I also didn't feel right just walking away. So I stayed put, listening for any other sounds, trying to figure out what I should do. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps, like someone was walking toward me from deep in the woods. My stomach dropped. I couldn't see anyone, but the footsteps kept getting closer. It felt like they were moving right toward me, even though I couldn't see a thing. A wave of fear hit me, and all I wanted to do was get back to the truck. I turned around and quickly walked back to the truck, slamming the door behind me. I locked the doors and sat there, breathing hard, my heart racing. I didn't know who or what was out there, but I wasn't about to stick around to find out. I put the truck in gear and pulled back onto the road, speeding away as fast as I could. After a few miles, my hands were still shaking, so I pulled over again. I took a few deep breaths, trying to calm down, then pulled out my phone and dialed 911. When the operator answered, I explained everything, what I'd seen and heard, the scream, the blood, the drag marks, and the footsteps. She listened carefully and told me they'd send someone out to check the area. I waited by the side of the road until a couple of police cars arrived. The officers walked over, and I told them everything again, trying to stay calm. They told me to stay by my truck while they went into the woods with their flashlights. I watched them disappear into the darkness, my heart still racing, my mind replaying everything that had happened. What had I really seen? What were they going to find? They were gone for what felt like forever. Finally they came back, their faces unreadable. One of the officers walked over and told me they hadn't found anything. No blood, no drag marks, nothing. It was like the whole thing had vanished. I was stunned. I knew what I'd seen. I knew what I'd heard. But they were telling me it was like none of it had happened. One of the officers tried to reassure me, saying it could have been an animal, or maybe I'd just imagined things, that my mind was playing tricks on me. But I knew better. I've been driving trucks for too long to start imagining things now. I thanked them, climbed back into my truck, and tried to pull myself together. As I drove off, the eerie feeling still hung over me. I couldn't shake the thought that something or someone had been out there. And even though I was miles away from that spot now, I kept glancing in my mirrors, half expecting to see something following me. To this day, I still don't know what happened that night. But whatever it was, it stuck with me. Every time I drive down a deserted road, I find myself glancing at the woods, remembering that scream, the blood, and those footsteps. Before we move on to the next story, if you're still here, make sure to subscribe and let me know where you're tuning in from for more true stories. Thanks. It was late at night, and I was driving from Memphis to Dallas. The road ahead of me was empty, just me and the sound of my truck tires on the pavement. It was quiet, almost too quiet, and I could feel the hours starting to catch up with me. The clock read 2 a.m., and I was getting tired, but there was still a long way to go. The highway stretched on for miles with hardly any other cars, and the darkness made everything feel like it was moving slower. I had been on the road for hours, and the only thing keeping me awake was the steady rhythm of driving. There weren't many streetlights out here, and I was starting to feel the fatigue. I knew there was still a ways to go before the next truck stop, so I just focused on the road ahead, trying to push through. Then, out of nowhere, I saw two women standing by the side of the road. They were waving their arms, looking like they needed help. At first I thought maybe they were having car trouble. It's not that uncommon to see people stuck on the side of the road in the middle of nowhere. I slowed down as I got closer, trying to get a better look. My headlights lit up an older sedan parked a little ways behind them. It didn't look like much, just a car from the 90s, but that wasn't unusual for this stretch of road. I wasn't sure about stopping, but I felt bad leaving them out there, especially since it was so late. The last thing I wanted was for something bad to happen to them in the middle of nowhere. As I pulled up alongside them, I rolled down the window. "You girls need help?" I asked. One of them, a woman with short blonde hair, stepped closer to the truck. She had a worried look on her face. "Our car broke down. We need a ride into town," she said, glancing back at the car like she was hoping it would somehow start up again. I looked at the car and then at the other woman, who had dark hair and was standing a little behind the blonde. There was something about the situation that felt off, though I couldn't put my finger on it. The way they were standing, the way the blonde woman was looking at me, it didn't feel right. Like they were waiting for something. I glanced around. The road was still empty, no other cars in sight. I wasn't exactly eager to give two strangers a ride at this hour, but I didn't want to seem rude either. "Where you headed?" I asked, trying to keep things casual. "Just a few miles up the road," the blonde woman said. "We were hoping someone would stop." I hesitated. The more I thought about it, the more I felt like I was missing something. I looked again at the car, parked a little too neatly on the side of the road. It didn't look like it had been broken down for long, if at all. It just seemed staged, if that makes sense. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't adding up. "Sorry, but I can't give you a ride," I said, keeping my voice firm but polite. The blonde woman's face dropped, and the dark-haired woman behind her shifted slightly, like she was about to step forward. I quickly put my truck in gear and started to pull away, but just as I was about to pass them, I saw something in the rearview mirror that made my stomach drop. There were two more figures standing near the car, just outside the reach of my headlights. They were dressed in dark clothes, standing still like statues. I couldn't make out their faces, but the way they were just standing there sent a chill through me. I didn't know what was going on, but I wasn't about to stick around to find out. I hit the gas, speeding away from them. My heart was pounding as I drove, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just avoided something bad. But then, things got even stranger. A few minutes later, as I checked the rearview mirror, I saw the same car, the one the women had been near, following me. It wasn't too close, but it was definitely back there, keeping pace, like they were trying to stay just out of view. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter, and my heart started to race again. I had no idea what they were up to, but I sure wasn't sticking around to find out. I didn't want to risk making any sharp turns or stopping anywhere, so I just kept driving straight. The headlights of the car behind me stayed steady, far enough behind that I couldn't make out any details. It could have been a coincidence, but it felt off. Too planned. I tried to tell myself I was overthinking it, but it wasn't helping. I pressed down on the accelerator, hoping to put some distance between us. But no matter how fast I went, the car stayed right behind me. Not too close, but still there. It was like they were toying with me, waiting for me to make a mistake. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I saw the lights of a city in the distance, Dallas. As I got closer, I could see the glow of streetlights and the buildings ahead. The road started to get busier, and I slowed down, turning onto a main road that led into the city. The headlights of the car behind me started to fade, and after a few more turns, I checked the rearview mirror again. The car was gone. It was like it vanished. I couldn't see it anywhere, not even in the distance. Maybe they'd turned off somewhere or pulled over, but I wasn't sure. All I knew was that the feeling of being followed was gone, and with it, the anxiety that had been eating at me. I pulled into a well-lit gas station in the city and parked the truck. My hands were still shaking, and I was exhausted, but I felt better with the city around me. I went inside to grab a coffee, trying to calm down and shake off the feeling that I'd just barely avoided something really bad. I'll never know for sure what would have happened if I'd stopped to help, but I'm glad I didn't find out. I've been a truck driver for 20 years, and I've seen a lot of strange things on the road, but nothing prepared me for that night. It happened 2 years ago, and since then, I've been extra careful about where I stop. I always plan my routes to avoid remote spots, but back then, I didn't think I needed to. It was a summer night, and I was driving through a rural area in Mississippi. The road was narrow with thick trees on both sides. I'd been driving for almost 4 hours and needed to take a break, or I'd risk losing my license. I spotted a small turnout ahead and decided to pull in. It was just a gravel patch, but it was empty, and I needed to stop. I got out to stretch my legs. The air was muggy, and it smelled like damp earth. There was a swamp nearby. I could hear the frogs and see a bit of the water through the trees. I didn't think much of it and went back to the truck, locking the door and tying the seatbelt around the handle for extra security. It's a trick all truckers know. I lay down on the bed, pulled the curtain shut, and tried to sleep. I must have dozed off because I woke up to complete silence. The frogs had stopped croaking. I listened closely and heard something outside, slow, squishing footsteps, like someone walking in wet mud. My stomach tightened. Something wasn't right. I peered through the gap in the curtain. At first, I didn't see anything, but then I noticed a figure standing by the edge of the swamp. It was a man, but he wasn't moving. He just stood there, staring at the truck. His clothes were soaked, clinging to his body, and his skin looked pale under the moonlight. He started walking toward the truck, dragging something behind him. It made a dragging sound on the gravel. The closer he got, the clearer it became that he wasn't just walking. He was dragging a large, curved knife across the ground, scraping it against the rocks. I grabbed my flashlight and opened the curtain all the way. I shined the light on him, and that's when I saw the knife in his hand. His other hand gripped a hammer. He didn't move when the light hit him. He just stood there, staring. His eyes were wide open, but they looked cloudy, like he couldn't see. Still, it felt like he was staring right at me, and then he grinned. His teeth were black and broken. "Get away from my truck!" I shouted, trying to stay calm, but my voice shook. He didn't respond. Instead, he started swinging the knife in circles, slowly at first, then faster. I rushed to the ignition, my hands trembling. I turned the key. The engine sputtered but didn't start. "Come on, start!" I muttered under my breath. The man stepped closer, still swinging the knife in wild arcs. He reached the side of the truck and slammed the blade against the metal, making a loud screeching sound. I tried the engine again. This time it roared to life. I slammed the truck into reverse, pulling back fast. The man didn't move out of the way. He just watched, grinning like a lunatic. I slammed the truck into drive, trying to get back onto the road. I glanced in my side mirror and saw him standing there, knife in hand, still waving it around as though taunting me. I pressed the gas harder, speeding away, but just as I was about to make the turn onto the main road, I heard a loud thud against the back of the truck. I glanced back and saw the knife embedded in the truck's rear bumper. The sight of it made my heart race. I drove as fast as I could, not looking back until I reached a well-lit truck stop miles away. I parked the truck, my hands shaking as I got out to check the damage. The knife was lodged deep into the metal, its handle covered in something sticky that smelled awful, like rotten meat. I yanked it out and tossed it to the ground. When I got back into the truck, locking the doors tight, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I stared out into the night, but all I could see were the trucks in the parking lot and the dim glow of the streetlights. The silence felt suffocating. The next morning, I couldn't just let it go. I walked around the lot and started talking to a few of the other truckers. I told them about what happened on that stretch of road. I was surprised when an older guy, with at least 30 years on the road, nodded slowly. "Yeah, I've heard stories about that place," he said, lighting up a cigarette. "Been a few years now. Strange stuff happens there. Some of the old-timers talk about a guy just like you described, walking around with a knife. Don't know who he is, but he's been scaring drivers off for decades." Another trucker, a guy with a thick beard, chimed in. "I've seen him myself. Years ago, was driving that same stretch and the same thing happened. I didn't stop, but I saw him on the side of the road, just standing there, staring at me. I sped right through." It wasn't just me. It wasn't just a one-off encounter. The guy with the knife, whatever he was, had been around for a long time, haunting that stretch of road. Since that night, I've stuck to busy roads. I don't take chances anymore. I always double-check where I park, never stopping at remote places like that again. I've never seen the man again, but sometimes when the night's too quiet and the shadows too thick, I wonder if he's still out there, waiting for the next truck to stop. If you have any spooky stories, send them to the Gmail shown on the screen.